In this video, I'm going to be going through the Engineering Studies Preliminary or Year 11 HSC, Preliminary HSC or Year 11 Engineering Report for braking systems. Here I have the assessment notification as of 2022. And what we're going to look at specifically is the structure, and we're going to look at the 5 parts of this assignment. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 parts. We're going to look at a couple of past examples of this assessment task. We're also going to look at referencing and report guides. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have a title page. So we can see here, this is an example of a title page. It says the school, it says the name of the project, so that way if the teacher is filtering through a lot of assignments, they can feel, oh, this is that assignment, that's the task I'm looking for. It doesn't have the student name, it has a student number, that's fine, that's actually good. I'm only showing you this title page because this is the only one that doesn't have the student name on it. It has a teacher, so that way it can find its way to the appropriate teacher, especially if there's more than one teacher for the subject. And the name of the subject, so that way if someone else picks this up, let's say this is found in the playground, it will find its way to the right faculty. Okay, so we're going to look at, so we have here an abstract. Why would anyone have an abstract? Well, so this guy, Bob Wee-Way, Dr. Bob Wee-Way, he is involved in writing the syllabus and writing the exam, so he's someone we should be paying attention to. Also, a lot of students go to the University of Wollongong, so that's a relevant resource. This report guide tells us how we can structure our reports. Now, we don't need to use a perfect copy of this, but it's a good model. So the abstract gives us, in 2 paragraphs, I think the idea is it's supposed to be less than, I believe it's 150 words, but I don't remember. I think there's a guideline for how long an abstract is supposed to be. It just tells you what this thing is about. Right, it says in this report, so for instance, our report, we're going to be looking at braking systems, we're going to be evaluating the history of braking systems, the function of braking systems, and we're going to consider some of the more advanced methods of, maybe the materials of braking systems. That might be an abstract that we could use. Okay, we've got acknowledgements. I don't really expect this so much in a HSC level report, but at uni you should be saying that there will usually be professors and other people who have helped you to compile this report. You should acknowledge those people. Now, then we see a table of contents. Not only does the table of contents have the numbered pages, so you can't really have a table of contents without having page numbers, but also it's got headings and subheadings. You might be familiar, if you've ever looked at Wikipedia, that Wikipedia references their paragraphs like this. This makes it very easy for people to follow the flow of your report if you number your sections like this. I have given you 5 sections that you should be writing about. I don't number them, but it's pretty clear that I've given you 5 sections. Okay, appendices, the collection or the plural of appendix, and we have different appendixes. So they're kept in the back, and in this case, it's got, because this is a funny report that's explaining how to write reports. It's a bit of a infinite loop, so this can be a bit of a funny reference guide. But we can see this is the way that we should be setting up our report structure. So we have our large heading just has 1 number, our subheadings have 1.1. We can even have subheadings below that. We can have, say, 1.5.1 or something like that. You've seen me do that in my notes to give you an idea of what that looks like. There probably isn't a great need for you to have more than those subheadings. You should be able to find this report pretty easily by just Googling Wee-Way Engineering Report. I provided a link in the assessment. This shows what your conclusions might look like. It shows what your references might look like. And that's the key one that I want to talk about. This is one of 3 main ways of referencing. This is the same referencing that they use in Wikipedia, which is whenever I make a claim that someone might say, well, how do you know that? Well, what you do is you put a little, now in Wikipedia it's a superscript, which means it's up high. You don't have to do that, right? Wee-Way hasn't done that. What you do is you put it in square brackets and you write the number. Then that way, if someone wants to find that reference, they can just go to the back and they can see that list and they'll be able to find the reference that you've used. Why reference is important? Well, first of all, it shows it's to prevent plagiarism. It's to show what research has been conducted by someone else. You're not taking someone else's credit. Also, it allows other people to investigate not just the validity of your claims, but also maybe they want to find out more. Maybe they want to learn more about this subject and they want to read the entire report. They want to see what other information might have been contained in that report. It helps them to better understand what you're talking about. So I'll just show what the example of the inline reference is. If I search one, I don't know why that didn't. I just tried to control it. I am using, sadly, the slowest computer on the planet. I should be able to find a. So you can see how he's used this claim. He said a quote, and he says, I don't even want to read it, right? The degree of corrosion, yada, 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 reference 1. And then that way, I can then, when I see that 1 in the text, I can then go back and I can see that 1 in the big list of references here at the end. It's really important that you provide inline text references, which means that there needs to be some way that I know where your references come from as I'm reading. If you just include them all at the end, I'm like, well, where did you talk about that? I don't know where you talked about Horton. I don't know where you talked about SCPD. I don't know where you talked about those things. It needs to be apparent when I'm reading where you've used references, so that I don't have to find it later. Now, I used to really worry a lot about this. I don't worry nearly as much as I used to. And I guess part of that was I wanted to show, hey, I've been to uni and I expect people to use the same standard that I use. Now I appreciate that you're in high school and we don't expect the same level as we will when you get to uni. But you don't have to use the referencing used by WeWay. The University of New South Wales, they have a great page on different... I just like this one because it's formatted well. They have a... if the link, I don't have the... I'll just drag this down so you can see the link. So student.unsw.edu.referencing. And when you click on that, you should be able to find... there's 3 main referencing styles. In-text or Harvard. So that's very common, especially in engineering. I'm not going to go into these other ones. I'm not going to go into the details. The APA, which is very similar, that's what they use in education. That's a very similar to the Harvard one. And then the one that we just looked at, footnote and bibliography, that's effectively what we're using. We're using something very similar to that. Now, the idea is that when we cite the reference, we put a little 1. In our case, we don't need to put a little 1. We're going to put the 1 inside square brackets, and then we just refer to it at the end. If you're doing a journal, you should actually use a footnote, but I don't need to see the footnote in the page. Because I'm not a university, I'm only looking for a high school level. So WeWay is fine. Okay, so now that we've established that, let's have a look at a couple of these assessment tasks. So we've got this one here. They've written an abstract. They've written a table of contents. We can see that we've got page numbers. We can see that we've got headings and subheadings with numbers, like so 1.1, 1.2. So we can see we've got 5 sections, just like we mentioned. So we've got the development of braking systems, 2 common braking systems, braking forces, alternative braking systems, and materials. Here, I guess you could do, you could probably have broken this down into 2 to 1, 2 to, well, yeah, they could have broken down these into subheadings, but as I look at it, I'm gonna leave that. Okay, so we've got an introduction. Introduction is just saying that in this report, we're going to be investigating these following things. Here we have, we have should be about a page. This student has gone a little bit over a page. That's fine. I'm okay with that. Where they've got, 4 different braking systems. They've gone a little bit, about a page is what I'm looking for, about 500 words. I'm more interested in the content and quality of the writing than I'm about any sort of page or word limit. As we go into the part 2, well, let's do one section at a time. Okay, so here we have another assignment, and I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. Sorry, I'm going to zoom out. So we've got the index. They have not numbered their headings. The page numbers are arranged. It's okay. I don't like the look of it quite as much. The abstract should typically be on its own page. If people leave out an abstract in this report, I'm probably not going to mark you down. So when we look at our development of braking systems, they haven't used the numbered headings. I can live with that. I'm probably not going to mark that down, at least not in this report. But they do have page numbers. They've written, this student has written extensively. Let's look at the next one. We've got table of contents. This looks like a really nice, it looks, sorry, I'm zooming in the wrong direction. That looks like a nice table of contents. What is it missing though? Page numbers. Yeah, okay. Because this student hasn't included page numbers at all. So this student later. I don't know if I have marks in the marking criteria for presentation. Let's have a look. This time around, no. But in later years, so in year 12, I will definitely have marks for formatting. So be aware of that. Okay. Okay, so common break systems. Yeah, we'll move on just to this one. Okay, so here we're up to development of braking systems. There should be some images. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. There should be some images. There's room for images. When we call those images, we call them figures, right? So if we look at Weiwei, he has a list of figures. And that is something that, again, at high school level, I don't really care about, but eventually you should be looking at that. Here we go, a list of figures. I don't care too much about that, but you should be including some figures. So whenever you have a picture, you should be referencing it so that people can say what's going on in that picture. Again, I'm probably not going to be too harsh on that. Even in year 12, I probably am not likely to worry too much about that. Okay, so we have looked at the first section for all of them. Now, using this one, we'll have a look at what they've written for common braking systems. So we've got, first of all, the transmission of forces. So transformation of forces. So we need to talk about friction. We need to talk about how energy has transformed in the braking process. We have drum brakes and disc brakes. Here we have a cross-section of a drum brake. And here we have a cross-section of a disc brake. That's exactly what I'm looking for section 2. The only thing that I need is a, here we go, the figures. I probably should say Fig 2.4, Fig 2.5, but otherwise pretty good. Okay, so here we have a sketch. That sketch is not really big enough. It should be, I need to be able to say, I think it should be about half a page, a third of a page minimum. But it is well labeled, and this student may have included the full-size one in their hard copy as an appendix, so that's fine. And moving back to this one, let's have a look. So we've got common brake systems. Generally, when we get to a new heading, when we're printing on paper, so Wikipedia, it's a different story, but when we're printing on paper, it should really be a new page. I understand if you don't, I'm not going to take marks off. I'm just saying best practice. Okay, so let's have a look. We've got a diagram. Okay, here's a diagram. This diagram is not as well drawn as the others, but I probably am not taking off, maybe I'm taking off 1 mark for that. This one here, again, that's well labeled, but I have shown in the past some standards for what is an acceptable drawing. This circle is maybe a little out of what I would say is comfortable for a freehand drawing. It's borderline. I'm going to say best case scenario is borderline for not losing a mark, but it's well labeled. It's really important that you label your diagrams. This is for everything you do in engineering. You need to label your diagrams. One thing it doesn't have is it doesn't have feathering. I really hate feathering. But it's a freehand sketch. It doesn't need to be perfect. I would just say, hey, when you draw this initial circle, if it looks more egg-shaped than circle-shaped, maybe take a second attempt. And, if you're using the best of 3 attempts, well, I'm probably going to mark that as okay. Now I'll have a look at section 3. Section 3 is on braking forces. There's 3 main forces that 3 main places where we're doing calculations in this braking force part 3. So first thing we have is leverage. At this point, we've learned about leverage. Now, if you want to do a simple question, you can just have the forces all be parallel to each other, right? For parallel forces, we know are very easy to calculate. We can do that quite easily. Where it becomes more difficult is when we have non-perpendicular forces, right? When we have 3 forces that are not parallel, that becomes more difficult. Now, you can see this student who, I'm only showing you examples of good projects. This student here has done a force on an angle, which is a more difficult calculation, right? If you wanted a simpler calculation, you could just have this force be horizontal, and all your forces will be horizontal, and they'll make this calculation much much easier. At this point, I think I've taught enough about levers to not. If you're struggling with levers, you probably need to go back and look at my videos for more detail. The next component is Pascal's principle. So we have a master cylinder, and this gives us additional mechanical advantage. I have not taught that yet, so this is me introducing this concept. We're going to do Pascal's principle probably after this lesson. Okay, lastly we have friction, and friction is again something we do as part of Chapter 3. This is the other half of Chapter 3 mechanics. At our level, I am looking for the simplest formula imaginable, F equals mu n. There are slightly more complicated versions that can help you get access higher marks, but for me, F equals mu n is a pretty easy equation. Really, it's less than year 8 level algebra. Okay, you have to use reasonable values for coefficient of friction, which again at this point won't make any sense to you, but it should make sense pretty soon. I expect you to determine reasonable forces and reasonable values, but if you just use the examples out of the textbook, you're probably going to be okay. So I think this is the easiest section by far. Let's have a look. So here's the forces, here's the Pascal's principle, here is the friction component. This is a slightly more advanced friction question. Here we have, and did all of them do forces on an angle? They did, because they all wanted to demonstrate a higher level of understanding. 1, 2, 3, so we've got the leverage, Pascal's principle, and friction. So there we've got our 3 parts. And when moving on to alternative systems, I have asked specifically that you talk about air brakes, brake-by-wire, and regenerative brakes. So when we talk about air brakes, we're talking about brakes that don't use brake fluid. So if you're driving a Toyota Corolla, I would assume that your brakes, when you press the brake pedal, the signal from the brake pedal that is sent to the brakes is by squeezing fluid. That incompressible fluid applies the force you've applied to the rest of the car. Once upon a time, we didn't use brake fluid. Instead, we used cables. When you pushed on the brake, cables would transmit that force to the brakes and activate the brakes. Though large trucks, they don't use brake fluid, because if they have a leak, well, you've got 30 tons that's going to drive into a whole bunch of cars. That would be a disaster. So instead what they do is they use a system, they use air, they use compressed air, because they're never going to run out of air, and they have the brakes as always on. You'll have to do your own research on this, but luckily there are some videos on YouTube, see the rest of the videos on my channel, where I talk about this concept, where you can get an understanding of air brakes and then follow that up with your own research. Brake-by-wire is a similar concept, except instead of using brake fluid, or so when I say fluid, I'm talking about specifically a liquid or air, you could instead use electronics, and this is called brake-by-wire. Lastly, the thing I want you to investigate is I want you to investigate regenerative brakes. And regenerative brakes are what are used in hybrid brakes. The idea is, instead of using friction to slow down the vehicle, to transform kinetic energy into heat, you're instead going to use generators to slow down the vehicle. I think that's sufficient information to help you with this project. So here we can see the same 3 things. They're in a different order. I'm definitely not taking marks off for that. Okay, so moving on to our last section, a material used in brake systems. This student has spoken about asbestos. I think asbestos is pretty common. Asbestos, and this student has talked about asbestos. Okay, there are other alternatives. I almost am tempted to put a ban on talking about asbestos, just because the 3 examples I used in this video were on asbestos. Other things you could talk about, for instance, are ceramic brake linings. The social implications of that is that it was used in racing. Right? The advanced materials used in brake linings in racing allow teams to do better. That has a social component, because people watch racing as a hobby. It's a social activity. I think that's a sufficiently extensive report, overlook of how this report is done. We can just see this student has referenced using the same footnote. Well, haven't used footnotes, but they've used the numbered reference system, the same as WeWay. This student has not included numbers. Straight away, that's a concern, right? Now, it looks like they've maybe used Harvard or APA. So what we have to do is we have to look and see, have they referred to nullity at any point? So they have not at any point indicated where they've quoted nullity or Ranjan. They haven't shown where that reference has been used, right? And if that's the case, they've done something wrong with their referencing. I'm not going to take marks off at this point because it's not my marking criteria, but down the line it will be, and there'll be a problem. Okay, so this student, let's just see if they've done in-text. Nope, I only have one. Oh, they're searching. I know that the first one had. Slowest computer in the world. Okay, here I can see that this student has used inline referencing, right? So the two, they've shown where they've cited these things. I don't know if this student has. I'm not going to go looking for it. I think that is sufficient for a sufficient detail for you to be able to start your reports. I guess the thing I would point out is, if you're watching this video now, I would suggest as soon as you have the opportunity, if you don't have anything planned in the next 5 minutes, go and start a document. And what you should do is you should create all the headings in Microsoft Word that it refers to. So I'll show you just quickly how to do this in Microsoft Word. I'm creating a new document, and then in Word, I am going to do that here. So I don't know why I don't have my ribbon. So if I go to Home, I'll pin that. Okay, so I'm going to do heading 1. So heading 1 is, well, I'm going to have like, so introduction. I'm going to have, so actually, well, I'll show you how you can put in a table of contents in a second. Section 1, what was section 1? Section 1 is development. Section 2? I'll put in some subheadings. 1.1 was block breaks. Maybe you want to talk about band breaks. So most people are going to do, say, drum and disc. Right? That's pretty... You can write disc with a C. I'm not going to pull that up. Let's say you do ABS. A lot of people do ABS. You might do regenerative brakes, whatever you want for there. Okay, and then 2, we're going to do... I think it's like common brake systems. And then 3 is forces. Okay, that's sufficient. Okay, so these ones are headings. So what I'm going to use is heading, heading. These ones here are subheadings. So I'm going to use heading level 2. I have lost my numbers. That's disappointing. 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Probably should have put a space after those. Okay, so now what will happen, and then for the rest of my standard text, what I should be using is normal. Right? And that way, if I want to change things later, I can actually just change it by changing all. If I change all headings, they'll all change at the same time. So if I want to go to this one, I can actually go to and edit a heading, modify, and I could say change them all to be from being this color blue to making them all orange. Right? Now, what I can then do is I can insert a, maybe it's in references, table of contents. And you can see it wasn't put exactly where I wanted it, but you can easily move it with copy and paste. You can see I've got my table of contents there. Yep. So Word also has a referencing. It has a system for putting in references. You can use a reference manager, right? You can use APA, so you can see like it wants to help you. APA is fine, right? I've said that that's acceptable. Harvard is fine. I'm not going to be too worried as long as you've done something. So that is what I suggest you do after you finish watching this video. And this is it.